November 4? November 4, Charlie, November Yankee. My name's John. We are in school in North Alabama, and you're 5'9" into here.
November 4, Charlie, November Yankee in Alabama. Thank you for the contact, amigo. Thank you for the contact. November 4, Charlie, November Yankee, 73, amigo. FTX-1, Bravo Alpha, Security X.
So the school club contest is going on this week, so there's a lot of school clubs on there. Hey everybody, it's Tom, WA2IVD. This is the second in the tutorial group for the FTX-1. The last time we concentrated on all of the dials and buttons on the front panel. This time we're going to take a look at the functions you can do on the screen. Mostly going to focus on the spectrum display for today and a couple other basic functions, but I think that'll be enough to cover for today. Let's have a look. All right, I'm going to keep the volume down here so that we're not getting disturbed by that. And I'm going to stay in the side-by-side mode with the spectrum display for today. And we'll cover the functions that you can do with the spectrum display, which is most of the soft keys across the bottom here. We'll start with the display mode. The default out of the box is fix or fixed. Fix means that the left side of the spectrum display is a fixed frequency. The right side is not fixed because the span button controls that, and we'll look at that here. If you press span, you can make the span anything from 5 kilohertz to 1,000 kilohertz. So if I go down to the very minimum here, it's just 5 kilohertz from left to right. Actually, I should have probably put it on a signal. And I'm not going to see a signal because I am on 14.248, and I'm only spanning from 14.00 to 14.005. And you'll notice on the right side here, there's an R and a T with arrows pointing to the right. That means that the frequency I'm tuned to is to the right of the spectrum display. So let's put this back to a more reasonable 500 kilohertz. Now we see the whole 20 meter band and then some. And now you can see all the signals on here. And let me change the mode and we'll take a look at the span again. If I touch the mode button, the next mode is center. And center means you'll see the little line here. That's my current transmit and receive frequencies right now. And as I tune, the spectrum display moves left or right as I'm tuning. The frequency that I'm on will always be in the center. Now if we change the span, and I go to 5 kilohertz, then we will see a much smaller portion of the spectrum. And of course I'm seeing no signals. Story of my life, every time I try to show something with a signal, there's never anything on here. And I may need to actually turn the display gain or the display level up a little. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, so now, and the band is not really great today. And if so 5 kilohertz is basically 2.5 kilohertz up and down. So it's hardly as wide as a full sideband signal. Let me make this just a little bit wider. Let's go to 20 kilohertz. And now as I tune, so now you can see a signal. Unfortunately, as I said, the band is kind of noisy today. Let me turn. Now you'll notice that the signal is completely to the right of the line, and that's because we're on upper sideband. If we were on lower sideband, the audio signal would be to the left. And if you were in CW mode, the signal would be pretty much centered on the line. You can change the display option so that the center is actually the center of the bandpass filter on the spectrum display. I kind of like it this way, which is the default for this radio, because I can very easily tell where to tune for upper and lower sideband. I want to have the whole thing to the right or the left. See if we have him tuned in good. And there's another signal right up here. Yeah, they're not coming in real great, but you get the idea. So if I turn the span back up to, say, 200 kilohertz, now you can see what's going on up and down the band. The last mode that you can put the display in is cursor mode. And in cursor mode, it follows your tuning. So if I tune, as I tune within the display, it stays fixed. But as soon as I go off the right side here, then the display will start scrolling and it will follow my tuning, and then I can tune back down and it stays fixed. So essentially it's a kind of a cross between fixed and center. It'll stay fixed as long as I'm within it, but as soon as I start moving out of it, it moves it along to follow me. And then you can go back into the center again. All right, let me turn the sensitivity back down. I find that you have to fool with the sensitivity a lot depending on how wide the scope is and band conditions. It changes up and down a lot, where you see nothing, kind of like this, or you see the screen is just all lit up. Let me get back up into 20 meters here. All right. The next function on here is 3DSS. This is the 3D spectrum display, and actually this is the default. So this is Yaesu's kind of fancy looking display. Let me try turning the gain down and see if that helps a little bit here. So in this mode, the display is sort of moving away from you and kind of gets smaller. You see little grids on the left and the right side of the screen. Honestly, I don't care for this mode. It looks really cool, but I don't find it that useful for finding signals. And one of the reasons for that is if you are working and there are storms not terribly far away, or you've got any kind of other sort of momentary noise that comes on, like if you have a lightning crash or a burst of static, it basically fills the whole display. And then as it moves away, you can't really see anything because the whole display is sort of all lit up. So for myself, I like the standard traditional waterfall. I find that's the easiest to read. That's a personal preference thing. The next button here is multi, and that's the multi-spectrum display. So if we touch that, it kind of squinches the spectrum display up, and then it gives us an audio spectrum on the right and a sort of traditional oscilloscope looking display here on the left. Let me see if I can get a signal so you can see what that does. Actually, probably FT8 would be a great example for that. So I have an oscilloscope. So I have the oscilloscope here on the left, a conventional oscilloscope display, and I have the audio spectrum here. Let me get right on 074, and then you can see all the different signals here. Now on the audio display, you can change the attenuation on this by just touching the display. Let me get that a little better. The default is 10 dB of attenuation. I just changed this to 20 dB so you can kind of see the signals in there a little bit better. But that's the multi-display. I don't use that very often myself, but sometimes if you're trying to tune in a RIDI signal or another digital signal, it might be handy. Next over, we have the scope button, and that says main right now, and that tells me that the scope is looking at my main frequency. If you remember from before, your main VFO is the right, the sub VFO is the left. The default for this is to be on whatever the active side is. So if I change my active side to the sub band, then you'll see this changes automatically to sub. If I change back, it goes to main, but you can touch this and have it go to the other side. So I'm transmitting and receiving on the main band, but the scope is looking at the sub band. Where this might be handy is if I am on 2 meters, and let's say I'm just casually monitoring 2 meters, or maybe I'm talking to somebody on 2 meters, but I want to have the scope on HF, and let me turn the level up a little bit here. Let's see what my span is a little high. Sorry, wrong button. Let me get this set up in a little better mode here. So we're on main. I'm going to set this to fixed. So it's 14 to 14,500. And then I'm going to go to my subband and I'm going to set the scope to main. So this way I can just casually glance at the screen and say, oh, look, there's a lot of activity on 20 meters, or there's some strong signals coming in, whatever. So it's kind of nice to be able to decide which band you want the scope to be monitoring. Span we've already covered. And then finally, speed is exactly what you would expect. It's how fast the scope goes. You have slow 1 and 2, and then fast 1, 2, 3. Not sure why they didn't just go like 1 through 5 or something like that, but so this is slow, and you can see how slowly the scope is moving. And then if I go to fast 3, I'm not sure why. I've had that happen before where sometimes it comes up with the meter functions. So that's fast 3, and you can see it's really zipping along. And the default out of the box is fast 1, which is probably a pretty good speed. At least I find it to be a pretty good speed. So those are all the scope functions from the front panel display. Now, some of the functions for the scope, or the adjustments for the scope, we have to go into the function menus for, so we're gonna go there today. And if you recall, that's the function button on the right. I'm gonna press and hold the function button, which you saw me do this a little while ago. So display level, we've already kind of discussed, and you can set it here, but unfortunately, you really don't know what you're setting it to, so we're going to back out of that and use the fact that the rig remembers the last function we used. So display level is just how sensitive the scope is to signals relative to the signals actually coming in. And I believe if you set it to 0 dB, that's actually calibrated basically, so that 0 dB is equal to like 0 on the S meter, and then these signals go up based on what their S reading is. And so, for example, if I go to 10 dB, I believe that means that the bottom line here is 10 dB, and then this is how much above 10 dB it is. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think that's how it works. Let's go back in. Next one is display peak, and you have levels 1 through 5. This is basically how far up the peak is from the display level. So if I turn this up to 5, you'll see it's just all orange. So the peak level is very low. So this is basically what is the peak level relative to the bottom level. So let me go back to the menu. Oops. If you're moving the knob, it's a little finicky sometimes. We'll go back to level. Let me turn that down to like 4, and then we'll go back to peak again, and then get back out so we can see the scope. Now level 5 is not quite filling the display so much, but it's, you see there's a lot more orange on here versus if I go to level 1, they all stay in the blue. Orange is the most intense color. Next one is display marker, and that is that marker that appeared in the middle. So if we are in center mode, the marker's off. You don't see where I'm transmitting on here. And if I turn the marker back on, you'll see it's showing that it's off to the right side. Why is it off to the right side? Oh, I know why it's off to the right side, because I have the scope on the main band and I'm on the sub band. So let me switch back over here. It shows the marker as to where you're transmitting. Now the marker is on and I'm in center mode. Let me go to fixed mode and you can see that it's down here. So let me one more time turn the marker off, and the marker went away. Next is display color, and this is just the different color options. So this is all a personal preference thing. If you want kind of a darker looking set of colors, let me go back in here and turn the levels up so we can see what that looks like. So this is kind of darker looking options. And if we go back, you've got greenish options. So again, personal preference. You can play with all those different colors and see which ones you like. I'm going to actually go back to the default for now. And I'm trying to turn my intensity down, which I can't do because I had already changed off of that. Okay. And then contrast, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. That's the contrast of the entire display. So 20 is very contrasty, and 0 you pretty much can hardly see. The default is 10. So far, I haven't really fooled with the contrast. I've found that to be acceptable for both day and night driving. And then dimmer, this one is a little more helpful for day and night driving. So you can turn the display up to 20 or down to 0. So those are the function level display settings. Now, for a moment, let me go back to the display mode over here on fixed. In the manual, it tells you you can go into fixed mode and then set the starting frequency, and then you can use span to show how much of the band you want to cover. Unfortunately, there is no place in the manual where it tells you how to set the starting frequency. I actually found this kind of by accident. If you are on fixed mode, you press and hold that button, and then it brings up the keypad to enter a frequency. So I'm going to say 14.150. Whoops. Let me try to hit the 5 there. 50, which is the bottom of the sideband for extra in the United States at least. And then I can set my span to 200 kilohertz, and now I have 14,150 on the left and 14,350 on the right, so I can see the entire 20-meter band. Now, you don't have a lot of granularity on the right side. Your choices are what you see here in those increments. So depending on which band you're on, you may or may not be able to get exactly the band segment you want. But if you set the bottom and then the span, you can get pretty close to what you might be looking for. So that's how you set the start of the spectrum display in fixed mode. Press and hold it, and then you can enter the frequency. When you do that, it not only sets the left side of the scope, but it also sets your receive frequency to what you enter. So if you're not where you want to be, and I have turned off the marker, which I didn't really intend to leave off. So let me turn that back on. All right, so now we have our marker. And that's the other thing on the display. I didn't cover this. If you touch anywhere on the spectrum display, it tunes to where you've touched. Now, obviously, your accuracy of how close you're going to hit to where you are is dependent on how fat your fingers are, but you can at least get pretty close. So if you see a signal way down here at the bottom of the band and you want to tune to it, you could do that pretty quickly. So, it never fails when I'm demonstrating a radio. As soon as I hit a signal, it stops.
Yeah, because, well, I'm just an individual, not in the school club roundup, but I thought I'd give you...
There we go. A lot of school club roundup stuff going on. All right, that covers all the basics of the spectrum display. Couple other things that are on the front panel. You've got the meters, and you can change, if you touch on the meter, this sets what you're going to look at when you're transmitting. In receive, it's always the S meter, which is the top numbers. So the default is power. You can then look at compression if you've got the speech compressor on. You can look at ALC, which is very handy for adjusting your digital mode transmit. VDD is what the voltage is on the final amplifier transistor when you're in transmit. Again, this doesn't show anything in receive. ID, that's the current going through the transmitter, so 0 to 25 amps through the final transistor. SWR, of course, very handy if you're tuning up an antenna. And temperature shows you the temperature. It doesn't give you actual degrees. It just basically shows okay, and then red up here in the upper part is not okay. And we're going to go back to power. As I mentioned last week, you can change the mode by pressing and holding this button up on the top. We covered that. I guess it's not going to let me out of there. But you can also change the mode by touching the mode up in the upper right corner of the display. And then finally, on the right side here, and you see it on both, this is FM, so it doesn't really show you a bandwidth. This is your filter width. And I have the audio display turned off. If I press and hold this, which is the default, you'll see that it's actually going to show a little kind of mini audio spectrum display in there.
Kilo 5 X-ray uniform. Kilo 5 X-ray uniform. I have you 5-9 Indiana. We're at School Club QSL.
So the default is to actually show the audio spectrum display. If you press and hold in the center of that, it turns that off. I leave it off because, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter, but I don't find it that useful. If you touch this briefly, it brings up a menu that allows you to look at the shift, width, notch, and contour. Shift is how much your passband is shifted off of the center. The normal is for it to be in the center of your audio passband, but you can shift that left and right. These are a little confusing. You would think the function button or the function knob would control these. It does not. It's actually the volume knob when this menu is up. So I'm on shift now, and if I turn the volume knob, it picks which filter parameter I'm adjusting. And then if I push the button, now I can adjust it. So you use the volume knob to control which parameter you're adjusting and what you're adjusting it by. If I go over to width, this is my filter bandwidth. You can go all the way up to 4 kilohertz, and you can go all the way down to 300 for CW. And you might actually even be able to go narrower than that if you're in CW mode. I'm going to leave it at 3 kilohertz right now. And then again, press to go out of that setting. Notch, I can turn the notch on and then adjust where the notch filter is. This is for a fixed notch. If you want to tune out a carrier or some fixed noise that you're hearing, and then touch that to get out. Now, you'll notice the notch is still there. If I want to turn the notch filter off, that got me back out of it. Sorry, I got to get into notch mode. Now press and hold, and that turns the notch off. And then contour, this is kind of a sort of a little bit less of a notch filter. This is a Yaesu filter mode. That I know I didn't have this on my ICOM radio. And this is sort of like an equalizer, or it's a shallower notch. I've not played with this filter mode much, so I can't really say how it works or how best to use it. That'll be in a future video. And as with notch, if I press and hold, it turns the contour off. So those are your filter settings. It all works the same over on the subband. And that is all that we're going to cover on the front panel display for today. But that's pretty much all the functions that are on the normal display. We went into a little bit of the function menus. Hope you found this helpful. As always, thanks for watching. I'm Tom, WA2IVD, and this is Ham Radio A to Z.